so what disruption, because every time you turn around, someone's telling you that you're being disrupted. Someone is flagging their technology or their thing or trying to entice you to move this or that way by using this trigger word. And so it's time for us to say, so what? And so because we are in the Motor City, where the assembly line originated, our beloved Henry Ford, we're going to talk about the future of mobility. So in addition to what Dan mentioned, that's a quick abbreviated bio, little stuff about me, but if you want to connect with me, reach out, please. You can get me on LinkedIn. So in addition to being an author of Disruptive Innovation, Digital Transformation, I am also a principal business consultant with TheNextIsh.com. We're located in the Metro Detroit area. We provide a number of services, but primarily our work focuses around disruptive innovation and digital transformation, the two key pillars for growth in the 21st century. Over the next 45 minutes, I have one objective, and that is to impart to you two lenses for you to filter disruptive innovation in the context of the future of mobility. Now, there are other lenses, such as strategy, strategic choices, as well as competition. Probably you know it best with 5 forces. But I'm going to cover just 2 lenses, consumer marketing and disruptive innovation. And then I'm going to hit some highlights and some conclusions. And then I'm going to ask you, did I meet my objective? So these are the key metrics that I want you to look out for. Did you learn? Disruptive innovation is driven by customer expectations. Disruptive innovation has a non-linear pattern. And disruptive innovation and digital transformation are complementary in the 21st century. So don't worry about putting too much thought into this because you're going to see this again. It's after lunch. We're all kind of getting that, oh, that was good. And we kind of want to sit back and loosen our pants and maybe, slouch a little bit. But I'm going to ask you to stay with me. And I'm going to ask you to stay with me because I want your participation. So when you see the phrase, so what, now what, I want this side of the room to say boldly, I mean like you mean it, so what? And then this side to ask the question, now what? And so every time you see this phrase, if we can do that, so what, now what, we're going to keep ourselves engaged, actively participating, and pushing me forward so I can feel your energy. So the first lens, consumer marketing. And Dan touched on this a bit when he talked about the pandemic and how in the before times we were all shuffling around trying to figure out what's happening. Like, is everything going to be owned by Amazon? I mean, literally, we were like, do I need an account? I mean, I got to figure this out. And so brands were also trying to figure out how consumers were meeting their expectations in this disruptive era. They were eager to figure out how you were buying things, how you were voicing your needs, and how your needs were being met. But if they didn't have a two-way communication channel, what you were saying, they weren't getting. They were talking to you, they were telling you, hey, we're great, we have this thing over here, we've got this extra feature, free shipping, buy one, get one free, same day, yesterday, with all that stuff. But if you weren't able to communicate back with them, then they were just talking at you. And that consumer marketing piece is critical in the 21st century, not only because you should always be listening to your customer, but because in disruptive innovation, the customer's expectations is driving the disruption. Keep that in mind. The customer expectation is driving the disruption. Here in the Detroit area, I commonly hear this phrase, and it's always attributed to Henry Ford, but he didn't say this, okay? So if you thought he said this, if I asked people what they wanted, would they say faster horses. He didn't say it. So this lovely gentleman at Harvard Business Review, he did an exhaustive research, dug deep. So anytime you hear anybody saying this, just say, pause. Send them to hbr.org, to Google it or whatever. But it brings up an interesting tension. You have people in the camp that believe that customers can't tell you what they want. They can't tell you how they want you to innovate for them. And then you have the adamant human-centered design people who are just dug deep in the voice of the customer. So at the end of this presentation, you're going to know what side you're on. Are you on the adamant voice of the customer side? Or are you on the, yeah, don't ask them, they don't know, they want faster horses? Does anybody besides me own this book? Oh, well, this book was written by one of the fathers of disruption, Clayton Christensen. His consultancy published this book. Actually, they produced the book. Harvard published the book. And on the very last page, the very last paragraph, it says this: we believe that the concept of innovation is in transition between a theory of random trial and error and perfectly predictable paint by numbers rules. We think of this transitional period as the era of pattern recognition. Now you would think, the father of disruptive innovation, the consultancy linked to his work, Harvard, that's some serious street cred. But I've been in innovation for over 20 years. I've led teams, I've done new product development launches, I've done ventures with startups. Where's this pattern? Who owns this thing? Is this like in some special book where you had to have like a flash, a key fob to get you in and a secret knock? I mean, like who did this pattern and where is it? Because it wasn't in this book. It was on the last page of this book. So I have a provocation for you. What if consumers have been telling us what they want all the time for decades? We haven't been listening. So maybe, in fact, there is a pattern. Maybe there are expectations customers have, and we just haven't been listening. So a little personal story. When I was a little girl, I'm going to say about 7 and 8, when it actually started like really bothering me, my daddy called me a pit bull, actually little pit bull. Yeah. So every time I accomplished something or I came to him for some recognition, he would say, "That's great, little pit bull." And I was like, why do you keep calling me a dog? And so one day I got up the courage and I said the exact thing, like, why are you calling me a dog? And he said, "Marguerite, when there's something to be learned, to be gained, you lock on and you don't let go. That's going to serve you well." Now, basically, I had no idea what the heck he was talking about, but it sounded like really good. So I was like, oh, okay, little pit bull. So when I saw the error of pattern recognition and paint by numbers, the little pit bull started stirring in me. And I said, if there's a pattern out there, I should know it. And so I conducted, during the before times, what can be called the scientific approach to observed phenomenon. Now, simply put, observed phenomenon just means you look out into the world seeking to understand and describe what you see. I had a whole lot to see during the pandemic, so I didn't really need any inspiration. But all of the technology and the problems and my own curiosity led me to this observed phenomenon. I dug deeper into the research, I read more, I spent more time with my peers, and then I arrived a list of historical use cases, and I put it all in this book. You're welcome. So now you don't have to dig through the research. You don't have to search for the pattern on the last page and the last paragraph of some book that they want you to buy, because I took it for myself. So it's available in over 19 countries on Amazon, as well as Barnes & Noble, Target.com, Walmart. If you subscribe to any of those e-learning platforms such as Skillsoft and O'Reilly, as well as some public universities where my book is taught, and some libraries. So I want you to own your learning and not feel like I'm shovel-readying something down your throat. So what you see here are 3 known definitions of disruptive innovation. So I'm going to give you a minute to read these definitions and decide. Now, you don't have to tell anybody. Are you an A, B, C person? Got your answer? Everybody good? All right, that was your first try. I want to hear it a little bit more next time. So the second lens of disruptive innovation is literally around this understanding that disruption has changed in so many different ways, and those definitions that you saw on the prior side could probably fit at any one time. And so none of them are absolutely wrong. They're just, some of them are less updated. And disruptive innovation is most necessary when you are impacted by something that's foreign. You know, you hear disruptive innovation, being used in the context of something that's abstract or something unknown, but it feels like a disruption because it's new. So I took on this challenge of finding this pattern, not only because the little pit bull reared her head, but also I needed it not to be like a one-hit wonder. Disruption is always blasted, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, it can't be everything. So I took these 6 use cases, and you'll notice different industries, different markets, some over a century, some just over a decade, to seek to understand what I saw. So because we're in Detroit, I'm going to focus on the first 2. Motor City, home of the assembly line for cars. I invite you to participate in a workshop that I have. You can get the details on TheNextIsh.com if you want to go into any other details about these others. But it was necessary for me to look across a broad lens to make sure that what I was seeing was real. It wasn't a period in time. It wasn't an inflection point. It wasn't a pause or a moment. It was real. So this slide is busy, so let me tell you what you're looking at. This is a timeline of music formats and systems. I left some fixed here so I don't over animate you. You know how click, 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 click. But you're going to pay attention that it's a timeline. It starts in 1877 or so. And pay attention to these labels at the bottom. The last label is going to show up at the end just because I ran out of room on the slide, so forgive me for that. And you're looking for 3 things. You're looking for clusters of same or similar innovation satisfying a particular disruptor. You're looking for technology enabling value, particularly digital capabilities. And you're looking for a shrinking in the lifetime of any one innovation. So 1877, phonograph, lovely Edison. Then we see the vinyl record. The vinyl record actually had several innovations. It was around improving performance, improving the quality, improving the lifespan, giving you better music, giving you longer play. And then re-reach tapes. So 8-track tapes, cassette tapes that were required a player. And then in the 1980s or so, CDs. And then a little known company, computer company, maybe you've heard of it, started thinking about what it meant to have limitations on the storage of your music. What it meant if you had a playlist that was all your favorites and you can access it in different spaces at any time you want it on the device, the iPod. And then this little known company shifted its business model. And it said, we don't need the physical things anymore. We're going to allow you to have cloud storage, put your music anywhere you want, play it from your home, from your car, from your office, from your AirPods, from your Apple Watch. We don't care about the device anymore. The material is gone. And in order for something to be a cycle, it's got to repeat. And that's what they did in 2020. They said, not only am I going to give you your music, but I'm going to give you your fitness. I'm going to give you your cloud storage. I'm going to give you your games. I'm going to give you your Apple TV, all in one subscription. The lifespan of any one innovation is shrinking. So if you're afraid of disruption, rightfully so, you should be. If you don't understand how disruption shows up, it looks like everything. So let's talk about the business model side of music. So not only was there a decoupling of the actual physical formats of music to something more digital, there were actually profit decisions impacting that. So I highlighted 2 years to focus on. This orange colored section, I was going to use the laser pointer, but this orange colored section is 1999. In the unit side, it was mostly CDs and CD singles. And if you look at 1999 on the revenue side, it was the highest revenue on record for music. 2020, you see that little rectangle down there? That's the units. But on the revenue side, it's the second largest selling revenue is through streaming and digital platforms. So, although they sold more CDs in 1999, the money reigned in 2020. So again, we see the timeline for any one innovation is shrinking. So if you think you can stay where you are and you can survive in your incremental product innovations, you'd be sorely wrong. And unfortunately, there's a host of lists that capture all of the companies that didn't survive a business model shift. You know the likes of them, the Blockbusters, the Circuit Cities, the Kodaks. Some of them were absorbed by other companies, and some of them just disappeared. So on this slide, you see cars. Now, there have been so many innovations in cars, putting it on a timeline, as you can see, would be an eye chart. So instead, I put the labels on the slide as kind of pavers. And so the way that you want to see this slide is the colored dot matches the label, matches the image, and it progresses from accessible to meaningfulness. Again, you see clusters of innovations around same or similar customer expectations. This is not an accident. This is the way that customers expect their needs to be met. Once they get introduced to a new product, they start developing expectations for the next and the next and the next. And that customer expectation demonstrates itself in this pattern. This list of products and services, you'll see a lot of it's around regulatory, it's particularly in the dependable disruptor. You should not take that to say that only disruptions are happening because people are being told by the government to do it, because a number of the innovations on this slide have nothing to do with regulations at all. It's all driven by what customers want. So you see in the very bottom in reliable vehicle-to-vehicle technologies, you see data and semi-autonomous. People want to be able to take their lives with them, whether they're in a car or they're taking their music on a road trip. And having a system that enables that fluid motion is important. In the usable category, now, I have an affinity for some of the Ford vehicles because they're killing the game in the usable category. I mean, just look how the F-150 onboard power showed up when people didn't have, electricity or power in Texas. Look at how the van life was created in the pandemic, where people were tricking out their transit vans, living in them, going on massive road trips and caravans with their friends. And then Ford pushed out the Maverick, which is a DIY maker vehicle. So people are looking for value beyond the original intent of the product in usable. In delightful, you see a whole host of marketplace capabilities delivered to track your groceries, track your road trip, help you to change the lighting in your vehicle, move the sound, change the climate. All of these things to deliver you a unique, delightful experience. Now, meaningfulness, and this is one that sometimes my friends in the automotive industry don't want to talk about, but it's the ability to take material out completely. Think of how many knobs, switches, buttons that were replaced by Alexa. So there is a necessary demand for never putting material in the vehicle at all and replacing it with digital value. We can't leave business models out of it. So what you see here, same labels, same similar clusters of innovations. I'm going to touch on the reliable more importantly because the accessible and the dependable, they are physical products. We know how cars are made. We probably have some understanding of the just-in-time assembly process. So it gets really interesting when you get to the reliable disruptor, when you start to see the systems around e-commerce, shared economy, peer-to-peer, service as a vehicle, subscriptions, freemium. I'll give you this thing free if you listen or watch these videos on your ride. Delightful. Technology platforms such as Microsoft Azure is allowing you to use information at greater levels of intimacy, customizing your experience to deliver a unique one in your vehicle, one that you can port to your rental. So if you're driving a Mach-E here and you're going to Florida on vacation, you can over the air port your features, navigation, contacts, so on and so forth, so that Mach-E is ready for you when you get in. And one of my favorite universities, MIT, has all of these innovation labs around advancing material science in a business model approach to take material out and constantly deliver innovations despite not adding more material. So there's tension. You have the product and service side. You have a lot of people working in jobs to produce things. And then you have the digital platform businesses, the Microsofts, the Apple, the Amazon, the Google, the Meta, Facebook. There's a struggle between do you make things or do you make value on top of things that are already in existence? So think of this as an imaginary scale. On one side, the green side, you have products and services. The other side, you have business model. So we're going to go from physical things in the product side, physical things in the business model side. And then we're going to advance with technology, how those things would change if they were enabled with technology. So enable with technology is creating new value, capturing value, and delivering value. And what you're going to see is every day, the digital platform business models win. They win because unlike a physical product that can be shared with a smaller group, say for instance, this table back here, will never achieve the exponential value of this table here, another table in Madrid, another one in Peru, another one in Detroit. And that capability of the digital platform business model to bring producers and consumers into virtual spaces to create, capture, and deliver value cannot happen with just a physical product. And that is the reason why you see exponential growth from single-sided platforms. Single-sided are your likes of LinkedIn and Facebook. Then your multi-sided is Apple, Microsoft, Google. Those companies are able to not only facilitate value between producers and consumers, but additional value from all of their ecosystem partners that's wrapped in it. That's where the two sides come from. So if you're on the product side only and you're hoping to incrementally grow your business, again, bad news. You got to do both. You absolutely cannot stay on the fence on this issue. Oh, great. So there is no magic beans. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You're not going to leave here with some magic script and some cue cards and you're able to instantly become an innovator. I'm not under any pretense of that. So I am going to tell you how this pattern works with hopes that when you do leave here, you're a lot more informed than you were when you arrived. So I mentioned earlier that this is a non-linear life cycle for disruption. A non-linear life cycle just means where you are determines where you go next. So if your market or industry, for instance, is being disrupted at reliable, you're going to look to usable. And also, I take a look back and check dependable too. Because as customers develop additional expectations and needs, as they move around this cycle, technology is constantly evolving. New ways of delivering value are showing up in each one of these disruptors. And to ensure that you don't miss a technology or not absorb the value from a technology, you should look back too. Also, this pattern is a way for you to anticipate where your customers will have needs in the next, which is the reason why we're called TheNextIsh. So needless to say, you're going to look for this pattern, this clusters of similar or same innovation around these disruptors. So let's talk about each individual disruptor. So the first one is accessible. That's when a product first comes on the market. Clayton Christensen talked about this disruptor. He was big all over it, simplified, lower costs, less feature sets, allowing smaller companies to enter into the low-end market of an incumbent and move up market. So accessible is typically your early entry for any innovation because you're breaking down barriers to entry. The next, after the barriers have been broken down, people start to ask for more. Well, I want this thing to work past its warranty, and I want the performance to be enhanced from the prior version. So that's when you get into dependable. It's quality and uptime. Then reliable. These products must not be in isolation. They have to exist in a system. You don't want to be in a situation where you're the only person with a VHS. You don't want to be the person who's like still loving the beta, right? So your product has to exist within a reliable system, a system that allows the customer to take the value with them and participate in a broad spectrum of capabilities. And then You want to wow them with usable. And that is what Steve Jobs did when he aggregated, he absorbed the value from many other devices, navigation, cameras, the flashlight. I'm like, why'd you go after the flashlight? The flashlight, music. He took email to another level with text enabled and video, and really moving that phone from something that you just called or listened to voicemail, maybe sent some text and email, to something that you basically can't live without. And then delightful. And I attribute delightful to Jeff Bezos. He got us all to accept random strangers' recommendations to buy about everything. And that trust level from Delight was us saying, we believe that other people have similar desires as we have, and they can inform our decision through customer experiences, through recommendations, through all type of feature sets to allow you to extract more and more value to give you a custom, unique experience. And then the last one, meaningfulness. You have probably seen so many companies talk about green energy, climate action. It is a thing. And it is a thing that increasingly customers are asking for. They don't want things that create inequality. They don't want ageism. They don't want to contribute to, utilizing unnecessarily resources on the planet. This meaningfulness is driving people's expectations for the next. And as I showed you before in the use cases, this pattern applies whether you make cars, mops, the digital economy, smartphones, cameras. Food packaging is one of my recent clients. There is literally no industry, no market, no spaces where you don't see this consistent clustering and this repeated expectation that customers are exhibiting when they get introduced to products. I have to confess, I wasn't the only one who saw a pattern. So these lovely people from MIT, they published some research in 2018 on B2B disruptors. And then Deloitte University Press published their disruptors. So what I did, and all the research that I did in my book, I mapped and I aligned. What these other patterns don't have is they don't have the cycle that I just showed you. They don't have the explanation on how it behaves. They don't have the order. And they also don't have an entire book dedicated to disruptive innovation, customer expectations in a model that teaches you about strategic choices, teaches you about when you should be considering oversaturation, because there can always be a point where your innovation is tapped out and you don't want to, basically squeeze the lemon until it's dry. You want to jump and maneuver. So I wasn't alone. I want to go back to the tension that I mentioned earlier between products and services and business models, because it's one that I think some people don't take as seriously, especially business leaders, as they need to. They think they have time. In the digital era, like we saw in music, not as much in cars, but digital literally drives out costs near zero. It scales like nobody's business. You don't have to be in a physical location to receive the value. And that's what these people are counting on. They're going to take your products and services that you've invested in, your R&D spend, your talent, your resources, your bread and butter, your brand. They're going to take it and absorb it. Because the product already exists, and all you need to do is hit usable, delightful, and meaningful. And now you're no longer competing for your customer. You're competing against the likes of the Big Tech 5 who have the capability to exponentially grow your market without you. So you don't see cars up here, and you don't see music anymore, but there's some big brands up here. There's a lot of money on the table, which is the reason why these big tech five, they don't need to fight with one another. They can eat off of you. All right. That was our last so what, now what? So we're going to get to the highlights. The lifetime of any innovation is shrinking. If you're planning on doing incremental innovation with hopes that your share price would hold, you'll be deceiving your customers, your shareholders, and your staff. So continuing down that path to only innovate in products and services leaves the door open for the big tech five. You got to do both. Understanding the pattern and the principles of how it behaves will help you be the disruptor. You will no longer be looking behind your back and under the table and all to your competitors trying to figure out where's the next thing coming from, because you're welcome. So remember those definitions I gave you earlier? Did anybody pick C? Hey, oh, good, good. So although these definitions are not wrong, as I said before, they just reflect different moments in time. Oh, let me go back. So this is the evolution of research done on disruptive innovation, starting from Clayton Christensen's original work in 1995, all the way to my work in 2020. So it is constantly evolving. People are constantly learning what it means to have disruptive innovation, how it behaves, and we're learning more and more. So in fact, that quote from that book could be right. It just is not in that book, unfortunately. So now I'm going to ask you, did you pick up what I was putting down? Do you now know that disruptive innovation is driven by customer expectations? Hey, it's nodding, that's good. Disruptive innovation is nonlinear. Disruptive innovation and digital transformation are complementary. And with that, I thank you for your time. So I think I have time for questions. Go right ahead.
I'm curious, thank you for sharing this. It's super insightful. I'm excited to read your book. In terms of patterns for disruption, have you thought at all or in your research anything around social media platforms? So it started with MySpace to Facebook to Instagram to now TikTok. I'm pacing in the circle that you shared TikTok's life cycle now where there is delight. I'm forgetting all the other ones that it fits into, but what's next after that?
Those are all platforms. And so if I were to map the disruption in social networks between friends and families and those that enable it, I would start with the original communication, which is the telephone. And I should have mentioned, and thank you for bringing this up, that what you want to look at is not just the now of the thing you see, but you want to go back in history because you want to see how it has behaved over time to know where you are. Because right now, if you're looking at TikTok and MySpace and some of these that no longer exist, and WeChat and Facebook and the like, you're looking at the now. In order to figure out what has happened in the past, you're going to have to go back. So I would go back to the original telephone. And God bless the person who sold the first telephone, because who were they talking to? As a salesperson for you. So the telephone communication was basically one-to-one. And then we moved to other means of system level communication, being able to make calls internationally, being able to do functions like hold and record. And so you're going to have to go back to figure out where the pattern is for communication. And I can help you with that, no problem, to show you how it behaves. Because what you don't want to do is miss all of the maneuvers that have happened before. Because if you go from now and you look forward, you're looking on a trajectory that doesn't inform the original pattern. The original pattern, I think, just from your comment, is communication, and how communication is transformed from a one-to-one relationship to a one-to-many, and how platform business models have enabled that not to happen with the telephone or even your local cable. It's happening over the internet. So again, more material out, more capability out of the physical assets, moving to digital. So if I were you, I would start with communication to see where those platforms are now in the pattern. Okay, I got 5 minutes. She's telling me I got 5 minutes. And if there are no more questions, I don't want to put any pressure on anyone. I know this is a lot to absorb. Yeah.
I'm a big Christensen fan. Innovator's Dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible book. It's difficult for organizations who are already successful to add innovation into their mix when they were successful at something they previously did. What in the patterns do you see helps organizations become innovators when others don't?
I'm going to take you to the moment that Kodak developed the digital camera and refused to invest in it. They stuck with film. So what you're describing is that innovator's dilemma, where we're making the thing that we know how to make, we're selling it to the customer that we know, and we're making money. And how do you convince a company that's making money that they need to pivot? That is a hard conversation to have, particularly when the lifespan of any CEO in a C-suite, I'm going to say, is very small. So they don't necessarily have the skin in the game that's necessary to do this long play. And too often, some things get squashed because it doesn't fit the mold of the thing that they're making. It's not going to make the quarter. The street is complaining. It's hard to have that conversation about pivoting. But I gave you a really good example. In my book, I tracked Netflix. When Netflix had hit its saturation on the boxes, the red boxes they used to sell, it was a hard conversation when they say, we're not going to do DVDs anymore. We're going to invest in the infrastructure to do streaming. And that conversation was a difficult one. And I think, in fact, if I recall my own research, their stock took a dive because they pivoted. But it takes bold leadership. And unfortunately, that's not in the pattern. Well, thank you guys for your time. I really appreciate your attention. So now if someone says, so what? Now what? You know what, so what? And you know what to do next.